My name is Dr. Sarah Jenkins. I'm 34 years old, and my own sister watched as her husband beat me half to death over a loan I refused to sign. Before I tell you how I faced them both in a courtroom and took back my life, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The first thing I was aware of was the coppery taste of blood in my mouth, thick and metallic. The second was the sharp, unforgiving cold of the hardwood floor against my cheek. I tried to take a deep breath, but the pain that shot through my left shoulder was so electric, so absolute, it stole the air from my lungs and left a strangled gasp in its place. The world was a blurry mess of overturned furniture and shadows. My coffee table was on its side, a shattered mug lying next to a fan of scattered mail. Across the room, the framed photo of my parents, the one from their anniversary, was knocked crooked on the wall. But none of that was the worst part. The worst part was the echo of my sister Olivia's voice, still hanging in the quiet, wrecked air of my Denver apartment. "You should have signed the loan." She hadn't shouted it. She hadn't screamed it in anger or fear. She had said it in a voice so calm, so devoid of emotion, it sounded like she was commenting on the weather. Like she was watching a boring movie and just making an observation. Then, the sound of her footsteps, walking away with her husband, Brad, leaving me on the floor. Leaving me. For the last 10 years, in the controlled chaos of a Denver ER, my entire life has been about fixing what's broken. I've set bones, stitched wounds, and restarted hearts. I've held strangers' hands as they took their last breath, and I've delivered devastating news to families, all while keeping my voice steady and my hands sure. My training is everything. It's a shield. It's a fortress of procedure and protocol that keeps the horror at bay. But nothing prepared me for this. Nothing in my medical career taught me how to process the sight of my own sister, my big sister who taught me how to braid my hair, standing in my doorway with her arms crossed while her husband's fists turned my world into a universe of pain. Every instinct screamed at me to just lie there, to close my eyes and let the darkness take over. It would have been so easy. The pain was a heavy blanket, pulling me down. But then, through the fog, another thought cut through. Clear and sharp as a scalpel. It was Brad's face, twisted in rage. And it was Olivia's, empty and cold. They thought they had won. They thought this was over. I felt a different kind of heat spread through my chest. It wasn't from the bruising, it was something else. It was rage. A cold, hard rage that gave me a strength I didn't know I had. Slowly, gritting my teeth against the fire in my shoulder, I pushed myself up onto one elbow. The room spun, a dizzying carousel of destruction, but I focused on one thing. The front door. The splintered, broken frame hanging off its hinges. My training as a doctor finally took over. Not the part that heals, but the part that assesses. That documents. My eyes scanned the room, the overturned lamp, the scuff marks on the floor, the shattered glass from the picture frame. Evidence. Every piece of it was evidence. And then my gaze landed on my cell phone, lying screen up just a few feet away, miraculously undamaged. I started dragging myself toward it, my one good arm pulling my broken body across the floorboards. They thought this was the end of the story. They didn't realize I was already preparing for the beginning of theirs. Before the splintered door and the taste of blood, there was my sister. My sister Olivia and I, we were the kind of sisters people write books about. Or so I thought. She was the whirlwind, the dreamer, the one who could walk into a room and charm everyone in it. I was the anchor, the planner, the one who made sure the bills were paid and there was a safety net for when her dreams inevitably hit a patch of turbulence. For years, that was our dynamic. When she dropped out of college on a whim, I helped her find an apartment. When her first business, a little boutique, went under, I was the one who helped her pack up the unsold inventory, telling her it wasn't a failure, just a learning experience. I was always the safety net. And I didn't mind. She was my sister. I loved her. Then she met Brad. On the surface, he was perfect. Tall, confident, with a smile that could sell sand in the desert. He was an entrepreneur, he said, always chasing the next big thing. The first time I met him, at a barbecue, he spent the whole time telling me about his vision, his ambition. I just nodded, but a little alarm bell, a tiny, clinical instinct, was going off in the back of my mind. It was the way his hand lingered a little too tight on Olivia's arm. The way he'd correct a small detail in a story she was telling, not meanly, but just asserting his version of reality. I'd seen it before in the ER. Control doesn't always start with a fist. Sometimes it starts with a quiet correction. About a year after they got married, they called me, their voices buzzing with excitement. They wanted to take me out to a fancy steakhouse downtown to celebrate some good news. I was happy for them, genuinely. I hoped this was it, the stable, happy life Olivia deserved. The restaurant was the kind of place with heavy linen napkins and wine lists that looked like novels. They were already there when I arrived, Olivia in a new dress, Brad in a suit that looked expensive. They were glowing. "Okay," I said, laughing as I sat down. "What's going on? You two look like you just won the lottery." "Better," Brad said, his smile wide and predatory. He slid a glossy, leather-bound folder across the table. It landed with a soft, expensive thud in front of me. "This, Sarah, is the future." I opened it. Inside were architectural renderings and stunning photographs of a mountain lodge near Aspen. A sprawling, magnificent building of timber and glass, with panoramic views of snow-capped peaks. There were pictures of roaring stone fireplaces, luxurious suites, and a restaurant with a deck overlooking a pristine valley. It was beautiful. It was also absurdly extravagant. "Wow," I managed. "This is incredible. Are you guys investing?" "Investing?" Olivia laughed, a little too brightly. "Oh, honey, we're buying it. It's our dream. The Aspen Sky Lodge. We're going to run it together." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I'm a doctor. I live on a doctor's salary. It's a good living, a very comfortable living that I worked my tail off for, but it's not by a luxury hotel in Aspen money. I knew for a fact Brad's latest startup had fizzled out months ago, and Olivia wasn't working. "How?" I started, trying to sound encouraging. "How are you financing this?" Brad leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, confidential tone. "That, Sarah, is where you come in. We have the business plan, the investors for the operating costs, everything. We just need the loan for the property itself. The bank is hesitant because our recent income is in flux." He said it like it was a minor inconvenience. But with a co-signer, someone with a stable, high-income profession and a perfect credit score, it's a slam dunk. He tapped the last page of the brochure. There it was, in cold, hard print. The purchase price. $1.2 million. $1,200,000. My blood ran cold. He wasn't asking for a small loan to get them through a rough patch. He was asking me to tie a multi-million-dollar anchor to my entire life. My career, my home, my financial security, all of it. "This is our one shot, Sarah," Olivia pleaded, her eyes wide. "This is everything we've ever wanted." I looked from her desperate face to Brad's confident smirk. He wasn't asking. He was expecting. The whole expensive dinner, the fancy brochure, it was all just stage dressing for the moment they would leverage my love for my sister against my common sense. I closed the folder gently and slid it back across the table. "It's an amazing project," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "But this is a huge decision. I need to think about this." Olivia's face fell. But Brad's smile never wavered. It just got a little tighter at the edges. And in his eyes, I saw a look that wasn't disappointment. It was assessment. The look of a predator that had just identified a problem it now needed to solve. I didn't need long to think. The next day, I had coffee with my mentor at the hospital, Dr. Eva Rostova. She's a formidable woman who ran an ER in Chicago for 20 years before moving to Denver. She's seen everything. I laid out the situation, the lodge, the loan. She didn't even let me finish. Absolutely not, she said, her voice sharp as a scalpel. Sarah, family doesn't ask you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. This isn't a loan, it's a leash. You sign that, your career, your security, everything you've built is tied to his bad decisions. Don't do it. Her words solidified what my gut was already screaming at me. That evening, I called Olivia. I was gentle but firm. Liv, I said, I love you. I will always support you. But I can't sign that paper. It's too much of a risk for me. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. Then I heard Brad's voice in the background, low and angry. Olivia just whispered, I see, and hung up. That's when it started. The next morning, the texts began. The first one was from Olivia. It was a photo of the two of us as kids, grinning in matching dresses. The caption read, I thought we were always a team. It was a punch to the gut. An hour later, a text from Brad. Loyalty is a two-way street, Doctor. You're about to learn that. The messages got worse. Brad would send long, rambling manifestos about family and sacrifice, about how I was hoarding my success, how I was selfish. He'd bring up every little favor he'd ever done for me, driving me to the airport once, helping me move a couch, twisting them into massive debts I now owed him. Then the calls started. Sometimes it was just heavy breathing. Sometimes it was his voice, low and controlled. You're making a mistake, Sarah. A very, very big mistake. Olivia's approach was quieter, but somehow more cruel. She'd send more photos, more memories, each one a little dagger of guilt. I felt sick to my stomach every time my phone buzzed. But I never imagined he would bring it to my hospital. It was a Tuesday. The ER was in its usual state of controlled chaos, a car accident victim in Trauma Bay 1, a kid with a broken arm crying in PEDS, the constant beeping of monitors. I was in the middle of charting when I heard a commotion at the main desk. I looked up, and my blood froze. It was Brad. He was standing there, holding that same glossy brochure, talking to the triage nurse. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. I just need to speak with my sister-in-law, Dr. Jenkins, he said, his voice dripping with false concern. There's a family emergency. The charge nurse, Maria, a kind, no-nonsense woman in her 60s, stepped in front of him. Sir, this is an emergency room. You can't just... Oh, I know it's an emergency, Brad cut her off, turning to look right at me, across the busy room. He held up the brochure. Our family's future is falling apart, and she's the only one who can help. But she won't. She'd rather sit here and take care of strangers than her own blood. The entire ER went quiet. Every doctor, every nurse, every patient in the waiting room, they all turned to stare at me. I felt a hot flush crawl up my neck. My professional sanctuary, the one place I was in complete control, had been invaded. He was painting me as a cold, heartless monster in front of the people whose respect I had worked a decade to earn. Maria immediately signaled for security. Sir, you need to leave. Now. Brad just smiled, a smug, satisfied look on his face. He'd done what he came to do. As two security guards escorted him out, he looked over his shoulder at me and mouthed the words, I told you. I tried to go back to work, my hands trembling as I tried to type. But I could feel the eyes on me. The whispers. Dr. Miller, one of the senior attending physicians, gave me a look I couldn't quite read. Was it pity? Or was it judgment? I felt exposed, humiliated, and utterly powerless. He hadn't laid a hand on me, but it felt like an assault. He had breached the walls of my fortress. Driving home, I felt like the walls were closing in. He had brought the fight to my hospital, my sanctuary. I felt completely, utterly alone. If you're still listening, could you do me a favor? Please like this video and just comment the number 1 below. It lets me know you gave me a like, and it tells me that you're here with me on this journey. Your support is a bigger encouragement than you can imagine. Just the number 1. And then let me tell you what happened next. The night it happened started with a phone call. It had been a week since the scene at the hospital. A week of tense silence. No texts, no calls. I had foolishly allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they had finally given up. That they had accepted my no. I was just finishing a late dinner, the quiet of my apartment a welcome relief after a long shift. Then my phone rang. It was Olivia. My hand hovered over the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to just let it ring. But another part, the part that still loved my sister, couldn't. I answered. Hello? Sarah, her voice was strange. Flat. Rehearsed. There was none of her usual warmth. Brad wants to talk to you. He's on his way over. There was no, is that okay? No, can he come by? It was a statement of fact. A chill went down my spine. Liv, I don't think that's a good idea right now. He's already on his way, she repeated, her voice like a robot. Then she hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. Something was wrong. This wasn't a negotiation. It felt like an announcement. An ultimatum. I walked to my front door and checked the deadbolt. Locked. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, my mind racing. Should I call someone? Should I leave? But where would I go? Then I heard the truck. The roar of Brad's oversized pickup, a sound I had come to dread, pulling up outside. The engine cut, and the sudden silence was somehow more menacing. A car door slammed. Then heavy footsteps on the walkway. I backed away from the door as the first knock came. But it wasn't a knock. It was a heavy, flat-palmed slam that made the door tremble in its frame. Sarah! Open the door! Brad's voice was thick, slurred. I could smell the whiskey on him even through the wood. Brad, go home, I called out, my own voice shaking. We have nothing to talk about. The hell we don't! The second slam was harder, rattling the pictures on my wall. You think you can just turn your back on family? After everything we've done for you? Open this damn door! My hand went to my phone, my thumb hovering over 911. But I hesitated. That single second of hesitation would come to define the rest of my life. All I could think about was the scene at the ER. The whispers. The stares. The humiliation. The last thing I wanted was another public scene, my neighbors seeing police cars outside my apartment, another spectacle for everyone to talk about. I still believed, foolishly, that I could handle this. That I could de-escalate it. That moment of pause was all he needed. There was a grunt, a splintering crack, and the entire doorframe exploded inward. The door flew open, torn from its hinges, and Brad filled the doorway. His face was beet red, his eyes wild. He was on me before I could even scream. He grabbed the front of my shirt, shoving me backward with a force that knocked the wind out of me. My head snapped back and hit the wall with a sickening crunch. A flash of white light exploded behind my eyes, and for a second, the world went silent. When my vision cleared, he was standing over me, his chest heaving. You should have just signed the papers, he hissed, his breath hot and sour with alcohol. I tried to scramble away, but he was too fast. A fist connected with my cheek. Pain, sharp and blinding, erupted across my face. He hit me again, this time a hard, driving blow to my shoulder that sent me crashing into the wall. I felt a sickening pop, and my arm went numb, hanging uselessly at my side. I crumpled to the floor, the room spinning. And that's when I saw her. Olivia. She was just standing there. In the broken doorway, her arms crossed, her purse slung over her shoulder. She was watching. Just watching. Her expression wasn't horrified. It wasn't scared. It was impatient. Annoyed. Like this was just an unpleasant chore she had to get through. My eyes, already starting to swell shut, pleaded with her. I tried to speak her name, but all that came out was a broken croak. I was begging her, with everything I had left, to do something. To say something. To be my sister. She looked down at me, her face a mask of cold indifference. She took in the sight of me, crumpled and bleeding on my own floor. Then she looked at the wreckage of my living room. She sighed, a small, put-upon sound. And then she said it. The words that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. You should have signed the loan. They left. Just like that. Brad gave the leg of my coffee table a final, vicious kick for good measure, sending it scraping across the floor. Then he turned and walked out. Olivia gave me one last, unreadable look, and followed him. The sound of their truck roaring away was the last thing I heard before the silence of my ruined apartment settled around me like a shroud. For a few minutes, I just lay there. The pain was a living thing, a fire that consumed my shoulder and my face. But it was nothing compared to the cold, hollow ache in my chest. The part of me that had always believed in my sister, had just died on that floor. My training kicked in. Assessment. I could move my fingers on my left hand, but the shoulder was shot. My cheek was already swelling to the size of a tennis ball, and I could taste blood. I had to get help. Getting to my feet was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every movement sent a fresh wave of agony through my body. I used my good arm to haul myself up, leaning against the wall for support. The short journey across my living room to the shattered doorway felt like crossing a desert. I stumbled out into the hallway of my apartment building. My neighbor across the hall, Mr. Henderson, a kind, retired man, was just coming out to get his mail. His eyes widened in horror when he saw me. "Dear God, Sarah," he gasped. "What happened?" "Call 911, I whispered, the words scraping my throat. Then the adrenaline that had been holding me together gave out, and my legs buckled beneath me. The last thing I remember is Mr. Henderson yelling my name as the world went black. I woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the steady beep of a heart monitor. I was in an ER. But not my ER. I was on the other side of the curtain now. A young resident, his face a mixture of clinical concern and pity, was shining a penlight in my eyes. "Dr. Jenkins? Sarah? Can you hear me?" The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I was a patient. A victim. A set of injuries on a chart. They did X-rays. A fractured zygomatic bone, my cheekbone. Deep bruising and a suspected torn ligament in my shoulder, but no dislocation, thankfully. They cleaned the cut on my lip. The whole time, I just stared at the ceiling, feeling numb. Disconnected from my own body. The police came. I gave them my statement, my voice flat and monotone. I gave them Brad's name. I gave them Olivia's name. I told them everything. They released me a few hours later, my arm in a sling, my face a swollen, purple mess. A friend from work came and picked me up, her face a mask of shock and anger. She took me to her place, got me settled on her couch with an ice pack and some pain meds. I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, it was morning, and my phone, which the police had retrieved from my apartment, was buzzing on the table beside me. The caller ID made my stomach clench. It was Olivia. A wild, stupid part of me flickered with hope. Maybe she was horrified. Maybe she was calling to apologize, to say she'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe the sister I knew was still in there somewhere. I answered, my hand trembling. "Hello?" Sarah, her voice was sharp, annoyed. There was no remorse. No concern. Just impatience. "You need to stop this." I was speechless. "Stop what?" "This whole police thing. You need to call them and drop the charges. Right now." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "He assaulted me, Olivia. He broke into my home and he beat me. You were there. You watched him. You're making a mess," she snapped, her voice rising. "You're making this so much worse than it needs to be. People are going to talk. Think about Dad. Do you know what this kind of shame will do to him? Just tell the police it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you were emotional. For the good of the family, Sarah. For the good of the family." The words hung in the air between us. She wasn't asking me to heal. She was asking me to bleed quietly so no one else would be inconvenienced. In that moment, any last shred of the sister I once knew vanished. She was gone. In her place was a stranger, and that stranger was my enemy. My voice, when I finally spoke, was so cold it surprised even me. "No." I pressed the end button and blocked her number. The war had just begun. The days that followed were a blur of legal procedures and pain medication. My face was a roadmap of purple and yellow bruises. My arm was locked in a sling. I couldn't go to work, couldn't even really leave my friend's apartment. But that cold resolve I'd found on the phone with Olivia never wavered. The police were incredible. They treated my case with the seriousness it deserved. Brad was arrested the same day, charged with assault and breaking and entering. He posted bail immediately, of course. I knew I needed a lawyer. Not just the prosecutor the state would provide, but someone who would fight for me. On a recommendation from Dr. Rostova, I hired a man named David Chin. He was a quiet, meticulous lawyer in his 40s with a reputation for being a shark in the courtroom, especially in domestic violence cases. Our first meeting was in his downtown office. I sat across from his large mahogany desk, feeling small and broken. I told him everything, from the dinner at the steakhouse to the phone call from Olivia. I showed him the saved text messages from Brad, the long, threatening rants. He read every single one, his expression unreadable. "And you have a witness to the harassment at the hospital?" he asked, looking up from my phone. "Yes. A nurse named Maria. She saw the whole thing." "Good," he said, making a note. "That establishes a pattern of escalating aggression. It wasn't a one-time loss of temper, as I'm sure their defense will claim. It was a campaign." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't just listening to me, he was strategizing. He was building a wall around me. The police took a formal statement from Maria, who was more than happy to describe Brad's calculated performance at the ER. They documented the broken door, my injuries. The case against Brad was looking solid. But I should have known he wouldn't just sit back and wait for his court date. Brad's family had money, and they hired a top-tier defense attorney, a woman notorious for her scorched-earth tactics. The first move came about 2 weeks later. David Chin called me. "Sarah," he said, his voice unusually grave. "I've just received something. I need you to prepare yourself." "What is it?" I asked, my stomach twisting. "They filed a subpoena. For your employment records from the hospital." I was stunned. My work records? Why? What does my job have to do with any of this?" "They're not trying to prove he's innocent, Sarah," David explained, his voice grim. "They're trying to prove you're an unreliable narrator of your own life. They're going to dig through every performance review, every shift report, every single patient interaction you've ever had. They are looking for one mistake. One patient complaint. One comment from a supervisor about you seeming stressed. They are going to try to paint you as an unstable, high-strung, and vindictive woman who fabricated this entire story out of jealousy or spite. I felt the air leave my body. It was a violation of the deepest kind. My career was my sanctuary, the one part of my life I had built myself, through sheer hard work and dedication. And now he was going to invade that too. He was going to take the best part of me and twist it into something ugly to use as a weapon against me. Can they do that? I whispered. They can, and they are, David said. This is what they do. They put the victim on trial. But we're going to be ready for it. Just know that this is going to get much harder before it gets better. He was right. It was a new kind of assault. Not on my body, but on my character. On my professional soul. Brad wasn't just trying to get away with what he did. He was trying to erase me. To discredit my truth so completely that no one would ever believe me again. And I realized then that this fight wasn't just about getting a conviction. It was about saving myself, my reputation, and the very foundation of who I was. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker. The air was thick and still. I sat next to David Chin at the plaintiff's table, my hands clenched in my lap. My bruises had faded to a sickly yellow, but the memory of the pain was still fresh. Across the room, Brad sat with his high-priced lawyer. He was wearing an impeccably tailored suit, his hair perfectly coiffed. He looked like a respectable businessman, not a monster. He looked at the jury with sad, soulful eyes, the very picture of a man wrongfully accused. The first 2 days were a blur of procedures and opening statements. Brad's lawyer painted a picture of a close-knit family torn apart by a bitter, jealous sister-in-law, me. She claimed I was envious of Brad and Olivia's beautiful life and their ambitious dreams, and that when I couldn't control them, I invented a story to ruin them. It was so vile, so far from the truth, that I felt nauseous just listening to it. Then it was my turn to take the stand. David walked me through my testimony gently. I recounted everything, from the dinner to the attack, my voice steady despite the hammering in my chest. I kept my eyes on the jury, trying to convey the simple, unvarnished truth of what had happened. Then the cross-examination began. Brad's lawyer approached me like a wolf circling its prey. She was relentless. Dr. Jenkins, she began, her voice syrupy sweet. You work in a high-stress environment, correct? Yes, the ER can be very stressful. And would you say you handle that stress well? I believe so. It's part of the job. She then produced a document. My stomach dropped. It was my employment file. I have here a performance review from 2 years ago. In it, your supervisor, Dr. Miller, notes that during a particularly difficult period at the hospital, you seemed, and I quote, irritable and emotionally taxed. Do you recall this? It was a cheap shot. That review was from a month where we had lost 3 pediatric patients in a single week. The entire department was emotionally taxed. But taken out of context, her words painted a picture. Yes, it was a difficult month for everyone, I stammered. And I also have here, she continued, pulling out another paper, a patient complaint from last year. A man claimed you were dismissive and rude when he came in with what he believed was a heart attack, but you diagnosed as indigestion. Is that correct? The patient was not having a cardiac event, I said, my voice tight. I ran every necessary test. He was upset about the wait time. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. She was building her narrative, brick by ugly brick. I was unstable. I was emotional. I was dismissive. I was, in her words, an unreliable narrator. I left the stand feeling like I had been stripped bare in front of the entire world. The next day, they called Olivia to the stand. My heart sank. This was it. She was going to lie. She was going to put the final nail in my coffin. She walked to the stand, not looking at me. She was pale, her hands trembling. Brad gave her a small, encouraging nod. Her testimony started out just as I feared. She repeated the story their lawyer had concocted. That it was a heated family argument, that I had become hysterical, that I had tripped and fallen into the wall, that Brad had never laid a hand on me. Every word was a dagger in my heart. I just stared at my hands, unable to watch her sell her soul. Brad's lawyer was gentle with her, leading her through the rehearsed lies. When she was done, David had only a few questions, pointing out inconsistencies, but Olivia stuck to her story. It felt hopeless. Then, as she was about to be dismissed, the prosecuting lawyer, a sharp woman from the DA's office, had one final redirect question for Brad's lawyer. She smiled coolly. "Just a point of clarification for the jury," she said to Olivia. "So, your testimony is that your sister, a highly respected trauma doctor, fabricated an entire, violent assault, risked her career, and lied under oath, all because she was jealous of a business plan?" Brad's lawyer jumped up. "Objection. Counsel is characterizing the testimony." "Sustained," the judge said. But the lawyer wasn't done. She turned back to Olivia. "It must be difficult," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, "to see your sister, who has dedicated her life to saving people, behave in such an unstable way." Then she looked directly at the jury. "It seems Dr. Jenkins has a history of overreacting, both at home and at work." And that was it. That was the line. Something in Olivia snapped. It started as a small tremor in her lip. Then her shoulders started to shake. A single tear rolled down her cheek, then another. "I can't," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't do this." Brad's lawyer looked panicked. "Mrs. Miller, are you all right?" Olivia looked up, but not at the lawyer. She looked at me. For the first time in months, she really looked at me. Her eyes were filled with a terrible, gut-wrenching shame. "He's lying," she suddenly screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Brad. The courtroom erupted. The judge started banging his gavel. "He's lying. Everything is a lie." "Olivia, stop!" Brad hissed from his table. But she couldn't be stopped. The dam had broken. "He hit her," she sobbed, her words tumbling out in a torrent of guilt. "He broke down the door and he beat her. And I just stood there. I watched him. I saw everything. He hit her and I did nothing." She collapsed into shuddering sobs on the stand. The courtroom was in stunned silence, broken only by the sound of her crying and the judge yelling for order. I looked over at Brad. The smug, confident mask had vanished. For the first time, he looked exactly like what he was, a small, pathetic man who had just been caught. His face was ashen. The war was over. And I had won. The verdict came down 2 days later. Guilty. On all counts. The judge sentenced Brad to 5 years in state prison for assault and burglary. As they led him away in handcuffs, he didn't even look at me. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt quiet. The weight that had been crushing my chest for months finally lifted, leaving behind a hollow kind of peace. Justice wasn't a celebration, it was the simple, quiet end of a nightmare. The physical healing was slow. Months of physical therapy to get the full range of motion back in my shoulder. The scar on my cheekbone is faint now, visible only if you know where to look. But I know. The emotional healing, that's a longer road. For a while, every loud noise made me jump. Every unexpected knock on the door sent a jolt of panic through me. The hospital assigned me a therapist, and I started going to a support group for survivors of domestic violence. Sitting in a room with other women, other warrior sisters, who had their own stories, their own scars, that's where the real healing began. We didn't have to explain the shame or the fear. We just knew. Olivia filed for divorce before the sentencing was even announced. For a long time, we didn't speak. Then, about 6 months later, she left me a voicemail. It was short. "I'm in therapy," she said. "I'm trying to understand how I let that happen. How I became that person. I know you might never forgive me, and I get it. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry." We met for coffee a few weeks after that. It was awkward. Stilted. There were long silences filled with all the things we couldn't say. She looked different, thinner, older, but her eyes were clearer than they had been in years. She told me about the years of Brad's control, the subtle manipulations that had worn her down until she didn't know who she was anymore. It wasn't an excuse, and she never presented it as one. It was just an explanation. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. It was the first step on the long road back to being sisters. A year after the trial, I was back in the full swing of my life at the ER. I had been promoted to a supervising physician, which meant I was now mentoring the new residents. One night, a young doctor, bright and talented but exhausted, came to me, on the verge of tears. She was having problems with her family, who were pressuring her to leave her residency and move back home to take over the family business. They were laying the guilt on thick, telling her she was being selfish. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for advice. "What do I do, Dr. Jenkins? How do I tell them no without destroying my family?" I thought back on my splintered door, on the cold floor, on the look in my sister's eyes. I thought about the price of saying no, and the even higher price of not saying it. I put a hand on her shoulder. "I learned something the hard way," I told her, my voice quiet but sure. "In this room," I said, gesturing to the controlled chaos of the ER, "we draw clear lines. We set boundaries to protect our patients, to protect ourselves, to save lives. You need to do the same thing out there. A boundary isn't a suggestion. It's a non-negotiable part of your own survival." I looked at her, and I saw my younger self. "Boundaries are the first step in saving a life," I said. "Sometimes, that life is your own." Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but it felt important. I have a question for you all. Has family loyalty ever put you in an impossible position? I'd be honored to read your own stories and thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences matter. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more. You are not alone.